So just waiting a few more minutes, guys, to maybe 1 or 2 minutes till we the numbers of people joining settles down and stops. And we'll get started. Okay, I think I'm going to start, guys. We are just a couple of minutes past now. Hopefully more people will join. The first section is a recap anyway from our last session. So just a couple of things before we go on. As per the last session, I'm not actually able to see the chat. So if you have questions or you have a clarification that you want, please could you raise that in the Q&A section on the platform. I will definitely try to make time at the end for questions. Normally I go through those one by one and try and answer them live on the session. But if you do have questions, there'll be my contact information as well at the end of the webinar as per the last time. So welcome to this in our second of 2 webinars on digital transformation. This session specifically focuses on mobilizing your transformation and setting yourself up for maximum success right from the beginning. So there'll be some terminology that I'll use from our last session, so I will just briefly recap on that at the beginning and then start to talk about, okay, what is the framework of maximizing your success when you begin a program to a business change program around digital technologies. So firstly, what are we going to talk about today? I'm going to do a little bit of a quick recap about what is digital, what is why it's happening now. 1 second, I'll adjust my microphone. I'll recap on the digital evolution curve and then talk about strategy versus execution and the 9 critical success factors for successful digital transformation. We'll go through each of those and I will give you some examples. So firstly, just to recap, what is digital? What are we talking about here when we talk about digital and digital transformation? And so what this really is it's the market and behavioral change caused by the adoption of new technologies, and in particular the mobile phone. That we all carry, the smartphone, or indeed the mobile phone started that, but the smartphone really accelerated us as humans behaving and wanting to do things differently as a consequence of having new technologies at our fingertips. Our urgency stepped up. We are able to answer questions instantly. We no longer have to go to the library. We can go to Google, etc. These are technologies that have changed the behaviors of us as individuals and our expectations, and therefore the market is having to adopt and adapt to that change. So if your business was around in the 80s and the 90s, you're now having to adapt to that environment, and that's across the piece. So that's not just for us selling things online. It's happening across all walks of life at scale and pace for businesses, our partners, our competitors, and of course the way that we work as individuals as well. So this training course is being delivered via a video link from me in London to you around the world. And that's as a consequence of the availability of the technology, the availability of equipment to do this, etc., etc. That's a digital transformation of the educational platform. And so, in order for businesses to survive in this environment, they require business changed or digital led transformation to adapt, fend off disruption, remain competitive, and all of those things. So digital, the technology part, is just one of the building blocks. And as you'll see when we go through the framework, it actually affects the whole business and the whole organization, and how we do this. Technology is just that one part, remember. So this is from 2017, still very valid. New technologies, mindsets, business and operational models, all of the things that we do in business and commerce is changing as a consequence of this market and behavioral change. Not just how the business operates, but how the people within the business operate. What devices do we have? How do we work? It's very evident with the current concerns and restrictions being placed across Europe and the world as a consequence of the COVID-19 coronavirus, that technology has both been a huge an enabler in terms of continuity, but also communication, updates, etc. And indeed, in China, there are lots of examples of technology adapting quite quickly to the lockdown environments in the Wuhan district, etc. As a consequence, behavioral, individual and business behaviors have changed quite remarkably, even in a short amount of time, as a consequence of having this type of technology available. So they are able to continue operations of their business in many cases because of that digital technology. Just recapping why now. Well, 1900 to 1950, manufacturing rule model, and then in the 50s to the 90s there was this distribution growth, still a very few influences on our sale. 1990 to 2010, we started to have automated platforms like Amazon and marketplaces arriving, but again it was still very much a push model. The way that businesses made money changed, but the reality is that it was only in 2010, when the rapid growth of both smartphones and social media that were intertwined, that the number of influencers on a sale grew dramatically. Business models started to change quite significantly. Digital revolution is one way to put it, but it now is becoming about digitized to survive as an organization, and it's very much a case of as an individual, as a purchaser, I'm much more informed, I'm much more connected, my needs are much more immediate. So therefore, as businesses, we need to respond to that behavioral change, and that availability of access to technology that we all have to adopt and make myself relevant in our customers' lives. So, of course, this gives us huge opportunities as well. It's not just about having to change. It presents a lot of opportunity. Digitally led growth. So if you are advanced in these spaces, you can disrupt and grow quite rapidly. There are businesses that have peaked and deceased in the period of this since 2010. In just 10 years, we've seen businesses grow and then disappear. Especially in the entertainment areas of social media, etc. Lots of businesses taking some time. European retail is still struggling to adapt to a new way to engage with customers. But of course, the opportunities across all parts of industry, new business models, great operational and go-to-market efficiencies, presenting us with good opportunities, and hence being able to say, well, actually, let's see how we can evolve on the evolution curve. So just a recap for that, if you remember, Stage 0, that's I don't have any digital plans, so those types of businesses will soon be obsolete. Stage 1 is where I'm using digital technologies to market and sell to my customers. It's generally a bolt-on to the outside of an existing organization, although if it's newer, then maybe it's native. It's really about having a channel to create revenue and reach. So it's front end and it's multi-channel. So it's not just on the mobile phone, not just on a website, but it could be in app, it could be on the phone, selling over the phone. And of course, don't forget that the physical presence can be augmented by this technology to make it better, more efficient, more active, and more proactive. But of course, that's just fundamentally how you connect to your customers. Stage 2 is how you digitize the operation of your organization. So if you're a manufacturer, this is about digitizing how you manufacture, perhaps big investments necessary in machinery, perhaps big investments made in training for staff to operate that machinery, and so on. This is how your organization does what it does. Digital technology, it then becomes digital transformation then becomes company-wide. So this is not just about, so you have this perhaps a digital marketing capability where you can connect and you have reach and revenue acceleration and prevention to prevent disruption. But then when you're in stage 2, you have this organization that's able to adapt very quickly to the demands from the outside, both from your partners and from your suppliers and partners and to your customers. So by doing this, you're creating a lot of data, you're being informed on yourself and of course about your business. So stage 2 is about productivity and profit. So you're able to maximize your productivity, maximize your profitability, because your digital organization can adapt to what's happening in the outside world, what your customers are looking for. And finally, you can combine those two things and start to say, well, how can I lead in innovation in my chosen field, my business environment against my sectors? And by looking at the way you connect to the outside world and the way you operate inside your organization, you can start to pivot your business model to bring new and innovative, class-leading innovation through this platform to your customers or to your suppliers. So to give a competitive advantage. So this is the evolution. This is how businesses inherently do evolve. That's of course, if you are a new business, you can become native in this environment. But that's not to say that you don't have challenges at each of these stages. You have to continually evolve your marketing transformation and how you digitally market to your customers. You have to continually evaluate how your operation of your organization performs. And of course, stage 3 is doing that continually. So if you're a mature digital business, you're doing that all the time. Doesn't mean you don't do the activities at those stages, but it means you become natively protected from change around you as a consequence of technology. So by having, so we talk a little bit about the last session about having a balance of being very strong with strategy and very strong with execution. And this will become a theme that we will revisit when we've gone through the rest of this presentation. But we talked about last time about if you're very clear strategically where you want to go, you have the information to be able to provide you that, you have the executional capability of how you're going to deliver that, then you become into this top right quadrant of being an expert. And it's been proved by being strong strategically with technology and digital and your business plan, and being able to operate effectively and change your business and operate your business through that, you get these benefits. You have higher customer experience scores, you have higher retention of staff, and so on and so on. You can see it on the page, and it means you are more competitive. You have an advantage over your competition. You have higher profit and revenue as an organization. So we shall revisit this, and what I'll be able to do is map our the strategic change factors to this particular model. So when we talk about success in this space, what does it take to make it happen? How do you mobilize your digital transformation, and right from the beginning, you're saying, right, I'm going to put in place success factors that mean I am most likely to have a good outcome. So this framework has been developed by myself and my colleagues at Digital Works over the last 5 years. It's a proven methodology that we have used time and time again with our clients, both as individuals and as teams, putting in place in small, medium, and large organizations that want to embrace new things, new technology, and a new strategy for digital technologies, that digitally led change. And so what we'll do in this session is I'll go through each of them at a very high level on this slide, and then I'll go through them at the next level down, give you an example of what good looks like, and also in some cases what happens to organizations that didn't do this, didn't have this critical success factor very clear in their minds. But firstly, I just wanted to go back to the balance between strategic change factors and executional change factors. So here on this slide, you'll see the green ones are the strategic change factors. These are the bedrock of any change, digitally led change, that you must put in place as an organization before you start executing. So this is where you are doing the thinking, the strategic evaluation of how technology will change your business, and indeed how your economic environment around your business will change as a consequence of digital transformation happening, as a consequence of the behavioral change. Now, some of those references that you'll be utilizing in this strategic evaluation will be your competition. There'll be behavioral change in individuals. You might see a gap in the market. Whatever it is, it's this external force that is the reason why you're looking to embrace on this journey. And at the very center of those strategic change factors, sorry, is this clear vision, strategy, objectives, and targets. Now, it might sound, I'm not trying to be oversimplistic here and say, of course we have to have a strategy, but in the reality is that digitally led change, the vision of what how your business will operate it could be very different to what you do today. So you might be a shoe set, you might be a manufacturer and distributor of shoes based in Europe, and you may have a website. But the reality is, what you're trying to define here is how will people buy shoes in the future? How are you going to drive that environment? How do you want things to change? Do you want to have a network of virtual stores or consultation booths where people have their fittings for shoes? It's that type of, I'm picking shoes as an example, but you could have anything. Here, this is a very clear vision of when I have implemented this digital transformation program, how will my business be different? That's the vision. Then the strategy is, okay, how am I going to get there? My strategy to deliver the vision. What are my objectives within that strategy? And finally, what are the targets I want to see during that? So an objective being a goal, but what is the quantum of that goal? What I want to, I can't just spend lots and lots of money on changing my organization. I have to be making money. Do I want bigger profits? Do I want bigger revenues? Do I want more staff, less staff, etc.? These are all metrics that we need to have in that vision. What does my operating business look like when I achieve that vision? Now, it's quite difficult for organizations to grasp this because, as we've already said, digital is changing every part of our lives and your life and your business operations as we go through it. So you need to spend the time and effort to understand, how will my business change? How could my business change? How does my mindset need to change to be operating in this new environment? For me to be able to successfully deliver this change, to be able to successfully deliver the outcomes that my shareholders, my employees, my customers want to see. Included in that needs to be your appetite for risk to this change. So, and one of your targets could be a risk level target. So you need to be thinking about, do I want to try and do this in a very short amount of time, or am I going to take my time? Am I going to take 2 or 3 years to deliver on this digitally led change. These are all factors that you naturally build into decisions that you make in everyday life. You possibly don't consciously make these decisions, consciously break it down like this, but it's really, really important, especially important with digitally led change, that you have that detailed vision, strategy, objectives, and targets that you want to achieve between now and the realization of your vision. And then as soon as you're on that journey, you need to start developing the vision for the future so you can continually build and grow that business and achieve what it is, the outcome you want. Another reason, a final reason for being particularly focused on this success factor is that when you're implementing technology, it's important that you do it with a vision in mind, what it is, the end game, what it is you're trying to achieve. Because if you don't, what you'll end up designing is what you have today, or maybe a little bit of an iteration of today, rather than what it is you're trying to achieve in the future, what you're capable of doing in the future. So it's really important to do that. So I often use, and I'm not sure if I did it on the last session, but the example of a clear vision about how detailed and why technology is important is I use the car salesman. So a car salesman traditionally would be sitting in his car showroom waiting for people to walk in the door. Perhaps he's advertising digitally, but he's fundamentally, his business of operation is the floor of his of the showroom. Somebody walks into the door, he starts making evaluation about this individual. He starts, looking at, well, he's got a family with him, he's got out of a family car, etc. He's probably looking for a new family car, and so on. So this is where his experience and knowledge starts to bring success for the business. The longer he's been doing it, the longer and if he's successful, the more insight he may be able to gain from those interactions. Now imagine if you're trying to replace that with a online capability. How do you mimic that experience? How do you train your website to have those additional insights to make sure that you have as good a chance as many as sales? Now it's probably not possible to do that just on its own. So what you need to start thinking about, well, actually, let's flip this the other way. Let's look at it from the customer's perspective, and how would they like to engage in the process of buying a new car? And of course, then you need to think about their mobile phone. Then you need to start thinking about, where did they learn about my product? How am I going to build a positive picture for this individual before they even walk in the door? So when they arrive, hopefully for a test drive or for a consultation, you have information to share with the individual, so he can then use a complementary set of skills as a human to embrace that new behavior. So if I'm looking at that as an organization, as a vision, what I'm looking at is I'm moving away from just people. I'm going to a hybrid of people and technology and intelligence to help me maximize the information around the customer's experience. And that's the difference. It's a huge swing, going from just a people-based mechanic to a customer experience, both online and in the physical environment end game. And of course, that could augment still. I'm not in the business of selling cars, but of course, it could be that I can configure and virtually test drive my vehicle, look around my vehicle using augmented reality, perhaps, or indeed virtual reality headsets, etc., etc. So is that part of my vision? That's a simple example of how you need to go way beyond what's happening today and start thinking about what's going to happen in the future. I know I spent quite a lot of time talking about vision, strategy, objectives, and targets, but it's really, really important, and there's a reason there's a red box around it, that it is the most important factor in delivering successfully digitally led change. The other factors are equally important, but if you don't have that one, what your outcomes will be, they're not what you're trying to achieve, or indeed what you're capable of achieving as an organization, as a team. So going through the others, and I won't spend anywhere near as much time, but talking here on the ownership of digital by all of the executive team, we've already established that digital technologies are changing every part of our lives. So therefore, they're changing every part of everybody else's life. So it isn't a chief digital officer's responsibility to deliver this change. It's actually the whole organization's responsibility. If I'm thinking about how do my finance team interact uh, with numbers that are generated by an online capability, they're going to be lots more data, so they need more tools to be able to deal with that. If I'm thinking about my operations team, they're going to have a potentially new way of manufacturing and producing and delivering and tracking the performance of the operation of the business. So they're going to need new tools. They're going to be wanting to use their mobile phones, their tablets, their laptops to engage. So they equally have an important part. And of course, customers, if they were in an operational cycle, warranty, for instance, they don't want to be back to paper and pen and sending faxes. They want it to continue from the sale all the way through the delivery and so on. So we need to think about digital, or this digitally led change being distributed across the entire executive of the organization. If there is a chief digital officer, it's going to be the CEO. He's the person given the responsibility by the board to deliver this change. And then if you go into the board have to be thinking about, well, how do we sponsor and drive this digital adoption across our organization? How can we showcase that ourselves, reflecting the desire and need of the shareholder, who indeed can be part of that as well. So how is the shareholder updated about the performance of the business, and how can the shareholder make this decisions to help guide the business, etc., etc. So digital isn't just about technology and about them delivering it. Of course, the technology department have a task to help deliver the technology, but actually ownership of what it is going to do to the business is distributed. The second of these three is about user and customer experience. So again, we've said digital is affecting everyone's behavior about how we do things, how we want to do things, the immediacy we want to do things, both as a customer and a user, as employees. So we need to be focused on that experience throughout everything in the business. So, as he said, talking about the car salesman, he's thinking about selling cars. Actually, we need to pivot that and focus on what is the experience like for the customer to ensure the maximized chance of a completed sale. How can I enhance their experience? But equally, I can't do that at all costs. It can't be without acknowledgement for me as a user. I'm an employee trying to sell cars to the customer. I need to be able to do this in an efficient way as well, an efficient use of my time, etc. So when we design these digital outcomes that we want to see with these strategies, the objectives and targets, they need to be achievable around a customer and user experience outcomes. Then the final strategic change is the right organizational empowerment and environment. So this is multifaceted in terms of the things that you need to do, and it does differ from organization to organization. But there are a fundamental few rules that you need to follow here. Don't put barriers in your way is number one. Don't have incentive programs that stop people delivering on this digitally led change. Align your organization's outcomes and incentives behind delivering on this. I worked with an organization once. In fact, I'll park that because I refer to it later on, but it's the right environment. And also make sure you're making space for the adoption of these new processes. Make sure that you're factoring all of the nuts and bolts that needed to be accommodated in terms of skill sets, in terms of time, allowing extra time for changes to be implemented, and not trying to just shove it through as a business as usual program. They're very much a case by case basis, but it is really important to get that right environment correct. We talk a little bit about execution and communications, but the empowerment is important about getting balance in your organization between change, but also between that central vision and making sure that vision can be realized across departments. So those four are strategically really important to get right at the beginning, and the most bespoke one between companies to companies. Clearly, your vision needs to be the driving force behind this, but this right organization environment is about not putting anything in your way to prevent success. It's about making sure that you have the enablers to do that. Execution, well, there's not going to be any surprises here, I'm sure, and I'll quickly rattle through them. Long-term technical and data architecture and plan. So if you've got that vision, how are you going to build the technology to do it? Sort of makes sense, right? But you said what you wanted to do. Let's have a plan that delivers on that. Make the right level of investment. What do I mean by that is both a technological investment. So yes, don't buy something that you don't need. Equally, make sure that the technology you're implementing is going to be able to cope and deliver on the vision. So that's a sort of a requirements measurement exercise. But also think about the skills that people will need, or that you're going to have to give, that training and investment, and also the extra capacity that you may need to accommodate change at the same time as, of course, you can't stop. And you have to, the analogy people use is that you're changing the wheels on the vehicle as it's rolling, right? So you're changing this organization as it's going. What extra resources do you need to do that as well? I'm going to jump to the planning and measuring change centrally. Well, I've got one vision, I've got one set of outcomes. That's what I'm trying to achieve. So let's measure my delivery towards that. All of the activity that's going on in my organization, how is it contributing towards delivery of those objectives and targets? In the center here, and there's a line, the reason these three are in a line is that your vision is focused on your consumers, customers, and users, and then you're communicating about how you're delivering on that. So it's really important, especially in all business change, but especially around digitally led change, to articulate in communications to your organization how you are delivering on the vision, how you are delivering on the customer experience outcomes and user outcomes that you want to see. Now, I often get asked, well, that could be company confidential information, etc. Well, you don't necessarily have to populate it with lots of commercially sensitive information, but you can showcase how the impact on customers' lives. You can showcase the impact on users' lives, those positives. That's about bringing that communications, about that vision to life through a coherent communications plan, using digital tools, using the tools that you're talking about, and bringing that vision to life about how you're going to, or how you are progressing towards it. Finally, on the right here is cross-functional working, the right creation process. So if we think about delivering on a combined vision for our organization using this new technology, we think about being focused on users and customers and their experience of using this technology. We need to make sure that all the people involved in creating that environment for our users and customers are involved in the creation process of what we're doing. So this is cross-functional. If you think about an organization that sells things online, and then they have a sales pipeline, they have a digital marketing capability, and then digitally that product is created, and then of course it's handed into the customer and suppliers, etc. That journey end to end needs to be digitally enabled, and of course, but you're touching multiple parts of your organization traditionally, so they all need to be involved in creating that customer experience, that customer journey. So it needs to be cross-functional. And in terms of creating and delivering on a vision, or organizationally as a body of people, this one is by far the most important and most effective. By doing it the first time, right the first time, then you're not delivering parts of the puzzle, you're delivering it all together. You have an altogether view, and of course you can have projects that align into that bigger picture, but that creational process is done as cross-functional as possible, and making sure that everyone who has a stake in that process for your customer or for your user is involved in the creation process. And of course, that takes other skills as well. So you need to think about workshopping, cross-functional processes, and journey, what's called customer journey mapping. But these are all skills that are vitally important when you're doing digitally led change. So 4 strategically important change factors, getting the basics in place, and then as you're executing, continually making sure that these executional change factors are that critical to your success are in place. Evolving them is necessary to help achieve and deliver on that the top of the pyramid here, that vision, those objectives and those targets. So what I'm going to do next session is I'm just going to go and say, well, what does good look like? When I say a clear vision, what are the characteristics of that, etc. And then just a quick example of businesses that did or did not do that, and what the effect is. What is the outcome? In some cases, it's the same organization. We have a few examples. Unfortunately, I can't show you the name of the organization, but I can tell you the sectors, etc., and the outcomes that they saw. And then finally, there's a little exercise at the end that will help to look at, well, when we're doing these change, what is the balance? Why is the balance important? And then there is, you can take an organization or your own organization and give yourself a score as a little exercise to take away from today's session. So when I talk about vision, strategy, and by the way, most of the cases is 2 on each slide, so I'll talk about the top one first. Vision, objectives, and strategy. So when we talk about this, what does it mean? What does good look like? So this needs to be simple, clear visualization of what the business will look like. But it needs to be from multiple perspectives. You need to think about it from a customer's perspective, from an employee's perspective, and a company viewpoint, i.e. how we're going to make money in this new environment. It needs laser focused objectives. So what I mean by that is you can use multiple sources to create your objectives. It could be competition, it could be inward ambition, it could be gaps in the market. What is my objective and when? When am I going to achieve this? It also needs to talk about how it's going to be delivered. So now, when delivering on an objective, the strategy of what you do there is how am I going to get there? So often the confused is I work in strategy. Well, your strategy is about the execution of delivering on the company's vision, the company's outcomes and targets. So the strategy can be, it's examples, inorganic. I can go and buy a business that's got this technology. Organic, or a combination of the two. Organic, I'm going to put the technology in place and grow my business, and I'm going to stipulate how I'm going to measure that success. So perhaps I'm going to focus on being the best customer experience in order to get my customers, rather than being the cheapest, or rather than being the one with the most products. These are all capabilities within your strategy to achieve on a vision. Now, of course, if your vision stipulates one of those, then clearly that's your strategy that's embedded in your vision. So if I want to be the #1 customer experience in the market of selling cars, that is my vision, so therefore my strategy is to be the very best customer experience. My target might be 5 cars. Of course, that's not a very viable business. So you need to think about these leverages, these levers of how you'll want to achieve your vision. That's why the vision is so important. And of course, in here will help to frame the target to how you're going to achieve it. Understanding the delivery of how it's going to be achieved, this vision. It also needs to include what I call appetite, and that means about risk. How fast are you going to achieve this? And often that appetite is driven by threat or opportunity. So threats being from competition or from the market in general, other new entrants. Opportunity being I've seen a gap, but it's going to close, then I'm going to have to go through it quickly. Both of those are factors in adjusting your risk. So if you see a narrow window to deliver on a target, on a target or an outcome that you want to see, perhaps you have to adjust your risk framework to go after it quickly and spend more money going after that opportunity than you would normally be comfortable with. These are all factors, really important factors in adjusting how fast you're going to deliver on a vision. Business that didn't do this, what they had is a business in the UK that was under threat, having to adapt to the market change. But what they didn't do right at the beginning is really clearly set out what it was they were trying to achieve. They had lots of things to catch up on, but they weren't prioritizing those as to say, well, which one should we do first? So as a consequence, new opportunities or new threats were coming in all of the time, and they weren't holding steadfast to their outcome. They were swapping priorities. And of course, those, as a consequence of priorities changing all of the time, they just started to slow everything down. It affected morale, and it significantly impacted returns because they weren't really clear about what it is they're trying to achieve. Now, don't get me wrong, if you set up a vision and then you start delivering towards it and it's not working, that's okay to change. But you have a vision, everybody knows what you're trying to achieve, and as long as you don't change it too often, people will not get impacted and negatively impacted by constantly changing priorities. And that was the big downfall of this particular business, not being really clear about what it is we want to achieve, when we want to achieve it, and how. So executive ownership of digital, and the next one, what good looks like. Well, it's very, what you have is across your organization a very clear picture of how digital technologies is going to change that particular function, that area of an organization. And it's understood, by the way, not just by the owner of that area, but by each other. So, finance understands exactly how operations will be impacted, and vice versa. The CTO's role in all of this is to deliver help deliver the technology that will deliver that function. So his role is to put the licensing and technology in place, help deliver the code, whatever it is that the technology department need to do to bring the vision of what those departmental heads are trying to achieve. Of course, nowadays there's a little bit of backwards and forwards between a CTO and a CMO, for instance, Chief Marketing Officer, because the CTO is likely to have access to technology that the CMO is not aware of, perhaps. Although, and similarly, the CMO will be looking at the market and seeing competition there, behaving in a certain way, and he's going to be asking, well, what technology are they using? The same, but it's a little bit of backwards and forwards, and a lot of business savvy CIOs and CTOs are able to significantly improve and accelerate the delivery of digitally led change because of their experience of technology and what it can do. But ultimately, it's still the responsibility of those departmental heads to deliver that digital experience, that user experience, that customer experience. The CEO should take responsibility for delivering on this, as I said. So this is his critical success factor framework. And so therefore, he'd be leading and executing on the strategy, adjusting targets, etc., to make sure that he's giving the space to change as well. So example of, by the way, this is especially vital at stage 2 of the digital evolution curve, because remember, there's a whole lot of the business organized in its operation. And when you start to digitize that, that's where this is quite complex. We talked about it the last time in the business model area change, the hard yards of digital transformation. Stage 2 is where there's a lot of interaction needed inside the organization to deliver on a digital operation. A different business that didn't do this, and their impact was cost. So it was a very large, fast-moving consumer goods business in Europe, based in Europe, 60 brands in the food industry, 100 countries, and their ambition was to have a digitally led change throughout the organization. So they had all these brands, and it was very federated underneath, lots of agencies, lots of creation processes, no real control, and so they brought in a digital director who was 2 layers down from the board. So now, in the vast majority of cases, that role is destined to fail because they're trying to change a whole organization without being in a leadership position, unable to set and change targets to accommodate change, unable to mandate incentives changes, etc., unable to task departmental senior executives with making changes because they don't have the authority. Now, in exceptional cases, you've got an individual that has the gravitas to be able to pull that off. But you're making their job very, very hard. Imagine if they were appointed to an executive position, or indeed as an advisor to the CEO. Imagine how much faster those individuals would do it. So, by putting it 2 layers down, that person is ultimately handed a poisonous chalice because they're just not going to get it done. And of course, in over 2 years, this person tried in vain to affect digital change across its organization. And in reality is what things just did not get wrong, and all they were able to do was estimate that 70% of the digital marketing spend was ineffective and costly. So it just wasn't doing what it needed to do. So they were able to diagnose, but they weren't able to change anything. That's because that executive leadership, that ownership of digital was not at the right level. And it's quite common for this to happen, where CEOs and boards and executives put digitally led change in the same bracket as a CTO. It's just some technology. It's not. We've established that it's every part of our business. So if anybody's going to be a chief digital officer, it's the CEO. So, excuse me, moving on to the critical success factors and the strategic change factors. Next one, customer experience led. So again, critical shift is primarily from the customer's perspective, but of course also from the user. So we represent here in this this diagram the customer proposition, what it is you're doing for them, and of course the experience is all of this combined. So it's not just their experience on the phone, but it's how were those experience enabled by insight, by am I a key customer, am I a valuable customer? Do I change the experience based on the value of that customer? If they're brand new, how do I build information on that customer? Of course, that's supported by the product, what it is we're delivering, whether that's in supply or logistics or warehousing. So, if I've got a great customer experience, I have to sell them the right product at the right price that's available in my. I can't sell them something I haven't got. So this is the whole customer experience, and of course, the systems and technology that enables all of that is the bedrock of that customer proposition, and the wrapper to all of this is the employee. So how they interact with all of those areas, the training, the tools, the empowerment that they have to deliver on that customer proposition. So if we take the example of the car salesman, he is largely in control of the customer experience from his own personal perspective, but he's not in charge of the environment. He's not in charge of the website. He's not in charge of how do you bring those things together to have a cohesive view of your product to the customer. He doesn't set the temperature going up or down in the car showroom, etc. He certainly, as a car salesman, won't own the data and information about that customer, but how he uses it, that's important. The supply, have they got the product that the customer wants? Have they got the car in the color with the extras, with the extra elements that are needed available? And of course, how does this all happen? How does the order get managed? How does the customer's communication happen with automation, with the business rules, making sure that this individual isn't selling at the wrong price, etc., etc. This is the customer experience that our customers have, and a wrapper around it is the employee. So the phone and the technology that I'm interacting with becomes important. I recently had a great customer experience with a store where I ordered something online. I was due to pick it up from their store, and they messaged me and said, I'm afraid it's not available. We can ship it to another place for you tomorrow, or we can deliver it to your house, etc. It's all done through a mobile phone. I didn't have to speak to anybody, and of course that experience was largely automated. There was no individual having to pick up the phone and make that call. I received the text, and by the way, it said if you want to talk to somebody about this, you can do that. Just press this button and somebody will call you, etc. But of course, what that is there was a problem. It could have caused a lot of heartache for the business in terms of people sorting that problem out. But the employee experience was almost behind the scenes. They didn't see it. They just had another happy customer. So this is when we're designing these outcomes, this is strategically important. Now, a good example of not thinking about this was the head of digital at Selfridges. What happened is they Selfridges is a very large departmental store, in case you don't know, based in London, and it's a luxury realm store. You go into their store, they have everything in the store, but then you go online and they had a subset of products. And of course, that's a very negative experience when we're thinking about multiple channels. And their customers didn't like it. The other one that I think here is and it's quite interesting. A lot of people think that Apple is the business who did this. It's not actually. It's Samsung. They copied Apple, But what they did is they focused a lot on their employee empowerment and the customer experience, and they adjusted and arguably now are a better smartphone in the smartphone sector than Apple. Because they do really focus on customer experience at all touch points, online as well as in store, etc. And reason we use them here is because they have in these periods continued to surpass Apple as what was previously known as a poster child for having great customer experience across their channels. Now it's Samsung that are reviewed as being better because they focused on having a compelling customer proposition that had this wrapper of a fantastic customer experience. And then finally, in the strategic changes, so this was the right organization environment. So we talked about this, saying it's planned, that you're thinking about the values, the skills, the structure, the processes. You're not putting anything in the way of making sure that these capabilities are there, focusing on developing the environment today and tomorrow. And of course, using development technologies to develop digital leadership skills. So that's about the skills of managing workforce, managing business processes, using these tools, etc. So you're not putting anything in the way of the adoption of these technologies. And that includes how you build internally. So a business that didn't do this was an e-commerce shipping solution. They had a small core team that had a digital program focused on amalgamating their platforms and giving a great customer experience. But then excuse me. But what they didn't focus on, they did it from a process perspective. They didn't look at it from a user and a customer experience perspective. So they just designed these fantastic processes that then went out to the market and they didn't work. And more importantly, internal employees weren't part of that solution. So this was a combination of not having the right cross-functional execution factors, which we talked about earlier, the right people involved, and as a result, it was a failure to compete with those digitally interconnected AIDA platform and the customer-centric competitors. What they did is they had great experiences that were just inflexible. And of course, when they tried to implement them in the organization said, no, that's not going to work for our customers, because it was done too much in isolation and not contemplating the engagement with the rest of the organization. So these are the strategically important change factors: clear vision, strategy, objectives and targets, ownership of the digital and IT team across the executive. So it's about owning your relevant area, customer experience led throughout, users as well, and then the right organizational environment. So I'm going to quickly run through the cross-function, the executional factors. They're slightly out of order. I do this on purpose because it needs to follow. We just talked about strategically not putting any barriers in place. Well, in terms of execution, we need to make sure we have this creation process that's essentially a group, a company-wide effort to make sure that when we're doing something new, we're going to create this great customer experience. We do it so everyone that touches the customers are involved in it. And actually, customer-led experience development is talking about how the employees deliver on that customer experience. It is about having a very clear vision of what you want to achieve, but having iterative process, so agile methodology of delivery. So having an overarching vision, which we've established, which is our waterfall, here's what we're going to deliver on, but then having the agility to deliver on that experience through a cross-functional team, and having the correct practices. It's really important when you do this that you have clarity on who is doing what to deliver that. So it's about what, the why, and the experience, technology, the how, and the delivery when. So that's really important. That's where your project management expertise comes in to say, this is what we're going to achieve, this is the time frame we're going to achieve it, and we're going to do it in a cross-functional way. The business that didn't do this, we mentioned these same guys, we did it earlier. This digital director was in that business trying to change everything. They put in place a big framework and then, of course, didn't iterate it fast enough. And of course, he was trying to change the whole organization. The mandate wasn't there. The cross-functional working wasn't there. Not everybody was involved. And what ended up being is that they were just very, very slow. Jumping to the next one, managing and measuring change centrally. So this is often called a PMO in some organizations, project management office. This is about having a central change function that regulates when you're doing what and what the business is going to deliver. So it needs to have plans that calibrate to the strategy. So this is our plans and here's how we're going to deliver it. It needs to be very clear about how it is going to deliver on that vision. Needs to be cognizant of pace of change, not trying to do too much at the same time, and encourage successful and communicate successful change. We talk about communications separately. The KPIs, measurement, got to be really clear about how it's delivering on those visionary targets and outcomes that we want to see. So an example here as a benefit, a business that did do this was a hotelier that we worked with. They invested in a central planning function across their organization. They wanted an integrated roadmap across all of their functions, digital, marketing, technology, the estates, because they're a national hotelier, have many hotels across the country. They wanted to focus on customer experience and they wanted to measure all of that. And in 2012, business was turning over 100 million, and 3 years later, that grew to 750 million. So it's a huge positive outcome. But it was the reason, one of the key reasons for that success was that rapid growth is that they were measuring themselves collectively across all of the outcomes that they wanted to deliver. Included in the heart of that was a refurbishment of 40,000 rooms in only 2 years. So, of course, then you have to book those and make those available, etc., etc., etc. So they grew very, very rapidly as a consequence of having a properly centrally managed central change function. 3 more to go. So making the right level of investment. Well, it sounds like it's going to make sense to say you're going to spend the right amount of money on the right kit, but there's quite a lot of businesses we worked with that have ended up buying very expensive platforms when they perhaps didn't need them, but also thinking about the cost of change. So not just the direct costs, buying a new platform and consultation and people to implement that new platform. It's also about the costs of developing new skills, but developing capacity in your organization. So how can I augment my existing technology team to keep business as usual running whilst they implement the new capability? And of course, this right level, the investment needs to take place at the right times, making sure that the business is prepared for that investment. Of course, embedded in that is what we talked about earlier about risk, about what is my vision. If I have a vision that has a narrow time frame to achieve, then I may need to invest significantly more money to achieve that. So I need to adjust my risk factors. I need to, ask to borrow or ask for more money from the business to achieve that. So it's the right investment at the right time. So whilst that hotelier that we spoke about had a huge successfully growth of rollout, what they didn't do so well was, and this is where even in the same organization you can have success factors achieving and not achieving, is that the digital team was hugely reliant on contractors. It meant that their normal website slippage was continuing. So in order to correct that and achieve those, they had to completely refocus the investment on that particular function. So bearing in mind, this organization was going from 100 million where perhaps a few tens of millions were being sought through digital. As soon as you jump that to 750, they found that 60 to 70% of their revenue were coming through digital. And of course, that was a hugely underinvested channel at that point. So there was customer experience was becoming poor, relationships between the technology and the digital teams was deteriorating, stress was high, a huge area of underinvestment. And the correction that was to change it from a contractor model to an employee model, and indeed 6 people turned into about 35 people over the space of only a year to accommodate and de-risk the delivery and maintenance of that large revenue jump. So therefore, the investment in that case was into that digital capability in that team to make sure to shore up and to continue to support the rapid growth that was being seen in the business. So strategically, they've got it right, but in this particular area of the business, executionally, they haven't got it right. So 2 more to go. Long-term technical plan. This is, we talked about having a clear plan of how you will use data and technology to support the vision. It is primarily led by those strategy, what it is the business wants to achieve. The secondary objectives are around controlling of costs, operational efficiency, etc. Included in here, it's about thinking about the technology architecture, scaling, making sure that mitigation planning is in there. So that plan needs to be able to support the vision, but without making it risky. You can't have everything being delivered in 5 years. It needs to be iterative. It needs to support the business ambitions and growth. We've talked about this high street retailer. Their technical platform was unsuitable for market needs, so the one that they had, and so they invested in a big e-commerce step, but it took a long time to deliver. So historically, they had not focused on a long-term plan. They'd said, "Oh, we'll just bolt that on," when actually technology needs to be long-term planning. And finally, one of my favorite subjects to talk about is communications planning. So what here we're talking about is really bringing that vision to life, visualizing and talking to your employees, perhaps your customers, about what your business will look like when you have delivered on these changes. The iterative process. It shouldn't be a big bang in 5 years' time. It should be, and here's how digital is improving the lives of our business. But equally, you have to have, what is the end game? Why am I doing this? So it's about, for your customers and the people in your business, both your partners, but also your employees. And don't forget the owners. Why are you making this investment? Here is the outcomes that we want to see. Show those benefits. This type of activity needs to be led from the senior management. So actually, this is one of my favorite stories about how communications can make a huge difference. MasterCard was regarded by many in the industry as just being a payment network. Yes, we facilitate payments, but MasterCard actually does a lot more. And through the process of listing, the CEO went on the front foot to lead communications externally and internally about his vision for the business and the success, showcasing actually this business is more than just a payments business. It's a fintech business, and then articulating why it was going to lead in all of these areas, why it was going to be successful. And of course, as a consequence, most people now regard MasterCard to be a leading fintech business. Visa, on the other hand, who are the sort of natural competitors, are sometimes regarded as being behind them. And most attribute this to this big push, this communication, this visionary leadership that the CEO at the time was responsible for. So in some cases, you could argue that he was the lead to deliver on a vision. So this was strategically important. Yes, it's a vision, but this execution, this communications plan was what gave him the advantage in the market, because people then naturally gravitated towards MasterCard as a leader in that field. So we talk about all these success factors, but one other area is to talk about balance. So if you have these success factors in place, you've got the strategy and you've got the execution. And so you need to have balance in terms of both the right environment, allowing the organization to change and not trying to control everything too centrally, but also making sure that you're not just letting the organization run amok and go and do things as they want. So here is just an example of balance in an organization. You have your leadership, clear vision, customer experience, or a target operating model that you're aiming for. You're innovative, you're brave, you have the risk factors, you're very clear about what you want to do. And then married with that is, I have a strategy and I have insight to guide my strategy of how I'm going to execute. I'm flexible, I'm data-driven in terms of my execution. I am reactive to things in the market. So these are these things at the core. These are the things that are responsibility of the senior executives in the business to continually monitor and drive. And then your execution becomes so much more easier. You're very clear about what it is you want to do. Your projects can operate across multiple areas of the business. You can have these multiple projects, and it's a real balance. I've got things, I'm making things happen. I'm communicating about them. I'm reiterating them back. I'm being data fed. I'm evaluating. So therefore, the management can continue to talk about the success of this program that it's achieving. It's not just fired off as a here's my vision, go deliver it. So the imbalance of that is to say, well, actually, I'm going to control it all from the center. I'm going to have a big program, and the executives are only going to be the people making changes. I'm not going to empower the organization to deliver on it. So we talked about that, the right environment. So this is boiling the ocean. You're trying to do everything from central. You're trying to iterate from the central and make decisions centrally. And of course, what that means is that we talked about having a very waterfall and an agile delivery mechanism. This agile is gone here. You've just got the top mandating changes. You're not allowing people in the organization to make iterative outcomes towards the customer experience they want to deliver. We call this the macro-only approach to digital transformation. Quite common. It's very driven from strategy. But what happens is it goes very, very slowly. It goes slowly. You're very clear about what you want to do, but it's not happening fast enough. Now, the opposite is where you just say, oh, this is what we're going to do, and then all of a sudden all hell breaks loose in your organization. It's not sponsored, it's not clear from the central, you're making it up as you go along. Right? This is also quite common, but actually what you tend to have, if you had smart people, you'll start to see some benefits with this, because ultimately people are smart people, they'll start to deliver things, but it's not coordinated. And if coordinated around a central vision, it would be so much more powerful. We call this the micro transformations, parts of your organization changing, but no real clear plan. And the reality is that the degree of control that you have to have the center or the edges of your organization is very much down to you as an organization, your appetite for risk. So this approach, central, is slow, low risk, very low risk, but ultimately will take a long time and perhaps will stall and fail, because even if you change the vision, it might not get enough momentum. There may be fatigue in the organization because it's just nothing happening. Whereas this is could end up costing a lot of money. You can rapidly change, but you could still equally have no outcome. Very exciting place to work sometimes because lots of things going on, but actually no central plan. Priorities might change, etc. And then, of course, if somebody comes in and starts to implement a vision or an outcome that is not being delivered by the organization, then you have real fatigue, moving priorities. We mentioned a business that had constantly evolving priorities earlier. This is the type of environment. Lots of projects, but no real central. So a little exercise for you today. Think of an organization, think of how you, maybe the organization you work for today, and then you can map your result. Do you feel like these are things that are happening in your organization today? And then once you have that, you'd be able to map yourself onto here. Where are you sitting? Are you an expert or you're a laggard? That's not my word, but it means that you have work to do. Vast majority of businesses are in that space. Another way to think about this, rather than red, green, or amber, is to give yourself a score 1 to 5, and then score yourself appropriately on the chart. So you can give yourself an assessment of where you think your business is and whether you're set up for digital success from the get-go. That's my presentation. I do have time for questions. I see there's one question in the Q&A box. If you do have them, please pop them in the Q&A. I had a question from Yaganath. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He's saying, what is the status of the businesses who didn't do this today? Right, okay, well, the first one on the visions and objectives, that UK high street retailer is now in receivership. The administrators are in, and they are about to be either hopefully rescued. A lot of employees involved in that business, but their business model is broken because they didn't adapt fast enough to the market environment. The FMCG business, that continues to be a business, but they have started to break their organization up. Rather than having a combined digital capability, they've started to break it up. They still survive, but ultimately they are still struggle to improve profitability. The multi-shipping carrier solution, that business unfortunately was scooped up by another business and their technology redeployed, but the employees were moved on. So that e-commerce platform no longer exists as an entity. The technology does, interestingly. So they created a technology that was not adopted, but then the technology was bought. And of course, the hotelier is still continues to grow from strength to strength. So those are the examples of the businesses that that are no longer with us. So that when there was lots of cost, those businesses continued to struggle. So we have other examples of businesses that don't do this, and we have a client at the moment that we're talking to that continually tries to, but they continue to tries to restart their digital transformation. But what they have now is this fatigue and unwillingness of their employees to engage, because it's a broken record, as they say. It's just the same story. Oh yeah, okay, what's going to be different this time? Is there a question? So when you launch this, it's really clear to be clear about why this is different. Why are you different? Why? And the framework could be quite a useful way to demonstrate that, by saying, well, here's the framework we're using, and here's why I can articulate to you why it's going to be a success this time versus last time. I don't have any more questions from anybody. Hopefully I'm here for as long as you guys need. I've got another 15 minutes if necessary. But please, if you have questions, drop them in the Q&A box. You have my details on the screen if you think of one later. But in the meantime, stay safe. I hope you're all well and not suffering too much with this virus and coronavirus. I'll sign off. Thank you very much.